Like many composers, even in the historical past, I, from time to time, occasionally, like to revisit something that I did earlier. Not necessarily to revise, but rather to look and listen again and probably place the music in a different context. To that effect, I had written, quite a number of years ago, a very brief brass quintet called Fanfare. And because I particularly wanted to accent the fact that Gerard Schwartz was a renowned trumpeter with the New York Philharmonic before beginning his distinguished career as a conductor, I decided I would take that little fanfare and in two parts of the work, it is in two sections, in a sense dismantle it in the first half and then reassemble it in the second half, placing it then in another context of a string orchestra.
Adieu by Bernard Rands is one of the 18 gun symphony commissions that I premiered in the 2010-11 season.
It was a commission from the Seattle Symphony to, not to celebrate Gerard Schwartz leaving, but the fact that for all those years he'd been a champion of contemporary music. And so many contemporary composers know him well, he knows their work well, they've worked closely together, and I've been fortunate to be one of those.
I have to assume that he wrote for brass quintet because prior to my days as a trumpet player with the New York Philharmonic, I was in a brass quintet called the American Brass Quintet. In those days, this would be in the late 60s, there were two well-known brass quintets in the United States, the New York Brass Quintet and the American Brass Quintet. And at the age of 18, I was in the American Brass Quintet. So I assume that Bernard wrote this piece for brass quintet and strings as looking back into my life as a brass player. It is a fabulous piece. Again, very short. A juxtaposition of those two quintets, the quintet of strings, 1, 2 violins, viola, cello, bass, and 2 trumpets, horn, trombone, and tuba. It starts out, I would say, aggressively, loudly, with a rhythmic motive played by the violins. All these motives at the beginning are all combinations of 3s and 2s, but they happen in unusual places. So, for example, it starts ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-ba-ba-da. I mean, it's a little unusual. After the initial statement of that, he repeats it, but this time he adds the violas, and then he adds the cellos. At the end of the phrase, he also adds the basses. Then the brass entrance. So the first entrance is the trumpet playing a solo. In a sense, the same kind of 3s and 2s. So the trumpet plays, the rhythm is ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-da-da-dum. So it's 3s, 2s, and 3s. And it carries on. And then eventually he does his whole little entrance theme, and then the second trumpet comes in and complements that. And then the horn comes in and joins in, so now we have a trio. Next, obviously, we have to get the trombone in, which he does, and then he brings in the tuba. After that, we have this conversation between the strings and the brass. Finally, the brass are left alone. They can shine by themselves in this wonderful little interlude that ends with the strings playing a couple of beautiful long chords. The next new material starts out with the horn, and now we're using mutes. So what the brass do is they put something in the end of the instrument, a different kind of mutes. There are straight mutes and cup mutes and harmon mutes and bucket mutes. And horns have basically two options. The horns have their hand in the bell to make the sound a little more mellow. They can stuff the hand in the bell, which is called stopped. He does some of that. Or they can use a mute, but there's only one kind of mute for the horn. So the horn starts with the mute, then the trombone, then the second trumpet, first trumpet, eventually the tuba, and the strings now are just punctuating rather than really answering. And then the strings have a little interlude leading to the next section of the brass, again led by the horn, trombone, tuba, second trumpet, first trumpet. Then we have what one could call the recapitulation of the beginning, or the repeat at the beginning. So at the very beginning, he had all the violins playing loud. Now he does the same thing, but he has all the violins playing very softly. This leads to the trumpet solo. Second trumpet joins in, just like the first time around. The horn, trombone, and then the tuba. And then we do have this conversation just as we did the first time. Again, occasionally the strings are having the conversation. Sometimes they're just punctuating with little gestures among or during the brass solo group. And the brass really now is full-fledged solo quintet. Brass playing with the strings in an accompanying role, and until pretty much like that until the end, and the brass just flourish at the end, and it ends as you would expect Adieu to end. How would you expect if someone says goodbye and you can just see them sailing away, and so it ends, you know, someone says goodbye and then they disappear. And in fact, that's how it ends, with the strings disappearing as the brass plays strong, they stop, and the chord remains as the strings disappear.
It's very difficult to strike a balance between informing a potential listener what might strike them and how they might listen, and not prescribing them and putting constraints on them. There is only one way to listen. That's to open your ears and open your mind and open your heart, and just let it take you where it will.